The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the small Afghan village as the Navy SEAL team moved through the narrow streets with practiced silence. Dust swirled around their boots, and the air carried the acrid smell of smoke from recent explosions. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson led his 8-man team through the maze of mud brick houses, their weapons ready, eyes scanning every doorway and rooftop for potential threats. The mission was supposed to be routine, a sweep and clear operation to eliminate a high-value target who had been coordinating attacks against coalition forces. Intelligence had indicated that the terrorist leader was holed up in a compound on the eastern edge of the village, surrounded by a small group of fighters. What intelligence hadn't mentioned was the presence of civilians who had been caught in the crossfire of the ongoing conflict. As the team approached the target building, the sound of automatic gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The SEALs immediately took cover behind a low stone wall, their training kicking in as they assessed the situation. The enemy had been waiting for them, and what was supposed to be a quick operation had turned into a full-scale firefight. "Contact left. Contact right," shouted Petty Officer James Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist, as bullets whizzed overhead. The distinctive crack of AK-47s mixed with the deeper boom of improvised explosive devices that the insurgents were hurling from the rooftops. Thompson quickly coordinated his team's response, directing suppressing fire while planning their next move. Hospital Corpsman, 2nd Class. Sarah Mitchell, the team's medic, crouched behind the wall with her medical bag ready. At 28 years old, she had seen more combat than many soldiers twice her age, having served 3 previous deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Her blonde hair was tucked tightly under her helmet, and her blue eyes remained calm despite the chaos erupting around them. The firefight intensified as more insurgents joined the battle from surrounding buildings. The SEALs found themselves pinned down, unable to advance or retreat safely. Thompson made the difficult decision to call for close air support, knowing that civilian casualties were a real possibility in such a densely populated area. As the team waited for air support to arrive, Mitchell noticed movement in a partially collapsed building about 50 meters to their right. Through the swirling dust and smoke, she could see what appeared to be a woman in traditional Afghan dress, hunched over something near the rubble. The figure was moving, but there was something wrong with the way she was positioned. Too still, too quiet for someone caught in the middle of a battle. "Sergeant, I see a possible civilian," Mitchell called out to Thompson, pointing toward the building. "Female appears to be injured or protecting someone." Thompson glanced in the direction Mitchell was indicating and nodded grimly. "We can't get to her right now. Too much fire coming from that sector." The battle raged on for another 20 minutes before the F-18 Hornets arrived overhead. The precision strikes quickly silenced most of the insurgent positions, allowing the SEAL team to advance toward their primary objective. As they moved forward, Mitchell kept glancing toward the building where she had spotted the woman, her medical instincts telling her that someone needed help. The team successfully cleared the target compound, finding evidence of the terrorist leader's presence, but discovering that he had fled before their arrival. With the immediate tactical situation under control, Thompson gave Mitchell permission to check on the civilian they had spotted during the firefight. Mitchell approached the partially destroyed building carefully, her weapon ready, but her focus on providing medical assistance. The woman was still there, sitting against a pile of rubble with her back to Mitchell. She wore a traditional blue burqa that was torn and stained with dust and what appeared to be blood. "Ma'am, I'm a medic."
"Can you understand me?"
Mitchell called out in her limited Dari, the local language she had been studying. The woman didn't respond or turn around. As Mitchell got closer, she noticed that the woman's posture was unnaturally rigid. There was no movement, no sign of breathing, no acknowledgement of Mitchell's presence despite the fact that the gunfire had stopped and voices could be heard clearly across the area. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Mitchell's training kicked in as she approached more cautiously, now treating this as a potential threat rather than a simple medical situation. The woman's silence in the aftermath of such intense combat was unusual. Most civilians would be crying, calling for help, or showing some sign of distress. When Mitchell was about 10 feet away, she called out again, this time in English and then in Arabic, hoping to get some response. Still nothing. The woman remained perfectly still, as if she were a statue placed among the rubble. Mitchell signaled to her teammates that something wasn't right. Rodriguez and Petty Officer 3rd Class David Kim moved to support positions while Thompson and the others maintained security around the building's perimeter. As Mitchell took another step closer, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The ground around the woman was disturbed in a very specific pattern, the kind of pattern that suggested someone had been digging, burying something, or preparing an ambush position. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a wounded civilian. This was something else entirely. The woman's unnatural stillness, the strategic position near the insurgent compound, the lack of response to verbal commands. All of these details suddenly formed a terrifying picture in Mitchell's mind. "Everybody back," Mitchell shouted, raising her weapon and taking several quick steps away from the figure. "This isn't right. Something's not right here." The other SEALs immediately responded to her warning, taking defensive positions and training their weapons on the motionless figure in the blue burqa. The air that had felt relieved just moments before now became thick with tension again. Thompson moved up beside Mitchell, his own weapon trained on the woman. "What do you see, Doc?" Mitchell's heart was pounding as she studied the scene more carefully. "She hasn't moved once since I first spotted her during the firefight. No response to verbal commands in 3 languages. The ground around her position has been disturbed. And look at her hands." Thompson followed Mitchell's gaze and saw what she was referring to. The woman's hands, barely visible beneath the traditional clothing, were positioned in an unnatural way. Not the way someone would sit if they were injured or scared, but the way someone might position them if they were holding something they didn't want others to see. The SEAL team maintained their defensive positions as Mitchell studied the motionless figure more intently. Years of medical training had taught her to read body language and recognize signs of distress. But everything about this woman defied normal human behavior. Thompson whispered into his radio, updating command about the suspicious contact while keeping his rifle trained on the blue-clad figure. "Base, this is Alpha Team. We have a potential threat disguised as a civilian, requesting explosive ordnance disposal support and rules of engagement clarification." Thompson spoke quietly into his headset. The response crackled back immediately. "Alpha Team, EOD is 20 minutes out. You are cleared to neutralize any confirmed threats but exercise extreme caution with civilian identification. Confirm status of contact." Mitchell felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. As the team's medic, she was trained to save lives, not take them. But she was also a warrior, and her primary duty was to protect her teammates and complete the mission. The woman's complete lack of response to the intense combat that had just taken place was beyond unusual. It was impossible for a living person. Rodriguez moved to a flanking position, trying to get a better angle on the figure. "Doc, I can see her from the side now. She's not breathing. I mean, there's no chest movement at all." Kim, who had been observing through his rifle scope, added his own disturbing observation. "There's something underneath her, guys. The way the clothing falls. It's like she's sitting on something or there's something propping her up." The pieces of the puzzle were forming a horrifying picture. Mitchell had seen this tactic before in intelligence briefings. Insurgents would sometimes use dead bodies as camouflage for improvised explosive devices or as bait to draw coalition forces into kill zones. The fact that this woman was positioned so close to their target, compound, and showed no signs of life strongly suggested that she was being used as a weapon. Thompson made the tactical decision that would haunt Mitchell for years to come. "We can't wait for EOD. If that's an IED, she could be rigged with a dead man's switch or remote detonation. We need to take the shot." "Wait," Mitchell said, raising her hand. Something in her medical training was screaming that they were missing something important. "Give me 30 seconds to observe. Something's not adding up." She pulled out her binoculars and focused on the woman's position. What she saw through the magnified lenses made her stomach drop. There was a small pool of dark liquid near the woman's base. Fresh blood that was still spreading slowly into the dust. If this was a corpse being used to hide an explosive device, there wouldn't be fresh bleeding. "She's alive," Mitchell announced, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's fresh blood and I think I can see very slight movement. She's not dead, she's dying." This revelation changed everything. The rules of engagement were clear about protecting innocent civilians, but the tactical situation remained extremely dangerous. If the woman was alive but had been placed there by insurgents, she could still be carrying explosives or could be bait for an ambush. Thompson faced an impossible decision: approach the woman and risk triggering an explosive device that could kill his entire team, or maintain distance and potentially watch an innocent person die from treatable injuries. "Doc, can you determine the nature of her injuries from here?" Thompson asked, hoping that medical necessity might guide their tactical decision. Mitchell adjusted her binoculars and studied the woman more carefully. The fresh blood appeared to be coming from her torso area, and there were what looked like bullet holes in the blue fabric of her burqa. The woman had been shot, probably during the initial firefight, but had somehow remained upright and motionless despite her injuries. "Multiple gunshot wounds to the torso," Mitchell reported. "Based on the blood loss pattern, she's got maybe 10 to 15 minutes before she bleeds out completely. But I still can't explain why she hasn't called for help or responded to our presence." Kim provided another crucial piece of information: movement in the building behind her. "I count at least 2 heat signatures on thermal imaging. Someone's watching this whole thing go down." The tactical picture suddenly became clear. The woman wasn't working with the insurgents. She was their victim. They had shot her during the firefight and left her in position, probably hoping that the American forces would either ignore her and feel guilty later, or approach her and trigger an ambush from the building behind her. "It's a trap," Rodriguez concluded. "They're using her as bait. Wounded civilian draws us in and they hit us from the building." Thompson's jaw tightened as he processed the situation. The insurgents were using a dying woman as bait, counting on the Americans' humanitarian instincts to create a tactical opportunity. It was a level of callousness that even veteran SEALs found disturbing. "Thermal signatures are moving," Kim reported. "They're getting into position for an ambush." Mitchell felt her medical oath warring with her military training. The woman was dying, probably an innocent civilian caught in the crossfire, and Mitchell had the skills to save her life. But approaching her would almost certainly trigger an ambush that could result in American casualties. "I'm going in," Mitchell announced, checking her medical bag and adjusting her body armor. "Negative," Thompson replied immediately. "Too dangerous. We'll suppress the building and call for medevac once the area is secure." "She'll be dead by then," Mitchell argued. "And besides, they're expecting us to either ignore her or approach cautiously. What if we do something they're not expecting?" She outlined a plan that was either brilliantly unconventional or completely insane. Instead of approaching the woman directly, Mitchell would provide covering fire while Rodriguez and Kim assault the building where the insurgents were hiding. If they could eliminate the immediate threat, she could then treat the woman without worrying about an ambush. Thompson considered the plan for about 10 seconds before nodding his approval. It was risky, but it addressed both the tactical and humanitarian aspects of their situation. "Light them up," Thompson ordered. The SEAL team opened fire on the building behind the wounded woman, their combined firepower shattering windows and pulverizing the mud brick walls where the thermal signatures had been detected. 2 insurgents attempted to flee from the back of the building, but were quickly eliminated by Kim and Rodriguez. With the immediate threat neutralized, Mitchell sprinted toward the wounded woman, her medical bag bouncing against her hip as she covered the 50 meters in seconds. As she reached the woman, she could finally see the full extent of the situation. The woman was indeed alive, but barely. She had been shot 3 times in the chest and abdomen, and she was propped up against the rubble pile in a way that kept her from falling over. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and she was going into shock from blood loss. But what Mitchell discovered next would change everything she thought she knew about courage, sacrifice, and the true cost of war. Mitchell knelt beside the wounded woman and immediately began assessing her injuries. The 3 bullet wounds were serious but potentially survivable if treated quickly. She started an IV line and began applying pressure dressings to the worst of the bleeding, but as she worked, she noticed something that made her hands freeze momentarily. The woman was clutching something against her chest underneath her burqa. At first, Mitchell thought it might be a personal belonging or perhaps a hidden weapon, but as she gently moved the fabric aside to access the wounds, she discovered what the woman had been protecting with her life. It was a baby. A tiny infant, maybe 6 months old, pressed against the woman's chest beneath her traditional clothing. The child was alive, breathing quietly, completely unharmed by the bullets that had torn through his mother's body. The woman had taken 3 bullets to her torso while shielding her baby, and even as she was dying, she had maintained perfect stillness to avoid drawing attention to the child. "Oh my God," Mitchell whispered, her voice catching in her throat. She immediately understood why the woman had remained motionless despite her agony. She wasn't being brave for herself. She was being brave for her child. Any movement, any cry for help might have drawn more gunfire toward them both. "Thompson, get over here now," Mitchell called out, her voice urgent but controlled. "We have a situation." The team leader jogged over, expecting to find either a confirmed threat or a routine medical emergency. What he found instead left him momentarily speechless. Mitchell had revealed the baby, who was now looking up at the faces surrounding him with wide, dark eyes that seemed far too aware for such a young child. "She's been protecting him this whole time," Mitchell explained as she continued working on the woman's wounds. 3 gunshots to the chest, massive blood loss, and she never made a sound because she knew any noise might bring more fire down on her baby. The woman's eyes flickered toward Mitchell, and for the first time since the medic had discovered her, she spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper spoken in Dari, but her meaning was unmistakable. She was asking Mitchell to save her child. Rodriguez, who had been learning the local language during his deployment, translated. "She's saying, 'Please take my son. Keep him safe.'" Mitchell felt tears welling up in her eyes as she worked frantically to stabilize the woman's condition. The medical reality was harsh. The woman had lost too much blood and had gone too long without treatment. Even with immediate surgery and a fully equipped hospital, her chances would be slim. Out here in the field with limited medical supplies, Mitchell knew she was fighting a losing battle, but she refused to give up. She pushed IV fluids, administered morphine for pain, and did everything in her power to keep the woman alive. The baby, meanwhile, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation and remained remarkably quiet, as if he had learned from his mother that silence meant survival. "Base, this is Alpha Team," Thompson radioed. "We need immediate medevac for 1 adult female and 1 infant. Gunshot wounds to the female. Infant appears uninjured. Priority Alpha." The response came back quickly. "Alpha Team, be advised medevac is delayed due to ongoing operations in your sector. ETA 45 minutes. 45 minutes was too long. Mitchell could see that the woman's condition was deteriorating rapidly despite her best efforts. The massive blood loss and delayed treatment meant that time was running out quickly. As if sensing Mitchell's distress, the woman reached out with a trembling hand and touched the medic's arm. She spoke again, her voice even weaker than before, but her message was clear. She wasn't asking Mitchell to save her. She was asking her to promise to take care of her son. "She wants you to take him," Rodriguez translated, his own voice thick with emotion. "She's saying she knows she's dying and she wants you to be his mother." The request hit Mitchell like a physical blow. She was a warrior, a medic, a professional soldier. She wasn't prepared to become a mother to an orphaned Afghan baby in the middle of a combat zone. But looking into the woman's eyes, she saw a desperation and love that transcended language, culture, and the chaos of war. "Tell her I'll do everything I can to save them both," Mitchell instructed Rodriguez. But even as she said the words, she knew she was making a promise she might not be able to keep. The woman smiled weakly and nodded, seeming to understand that Mitchell would honor her request. She then did something that would haunt the SEAL team for the rest of their lives. With her last remaining strength, she lifted her baby and placed him directly into Mitchell's arms. The child was surprisingly light, and Mitchell could feel his tiny heart beating rapidly against her chest. He looked up at her with those impossibly dark eyes, and she realized that in this moment, she had become his entire world. The woman who had carried him, protected him, and literally taken bullets for him was slipping away, and Mitchell was all he had left. "Sarah," Thompson said quietly, using her first name instead of her rank. "You know we can't take him with us." Mitchell understood the tactical reality. The SEAL team had to continue their mission, and carrying an infant through combat operations was impossible. But she also understood the human reality. This child would die if they left him behind. There were no functioning civilian authorities in this area, no relief organizations, no family members who could take responsibility for him. "We have to find a way," Mitchell said firmly. "I'm not leaving him to die." The woman's breathing became increasingly labored, and Mitchell knew she was witnessing her final moments. Despite her medical training and all her experience with combat casualties, she felt helpless. She was watching a mother die, and there was nothing she could do to prevent it. With her last breath, the woman whispered something that Rodriguez couldn't translate immediately. He had to think about the words, considering their context and the woman's emotional state. She said, "His name is Ahmad," Rodriguez finally reported. Ahmad means most praised in Arabic. She wants you to remember his name. The woman's eyes closed for the final time, and Mitchell felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was now holding an orphaned baby named Ahmad in the middle of a war zone, with no idea how she was going to honor the promise she had made to his dying mother. Thompson placed a gentle hand on Mitchell's shoulder. "We'll figure this out, Doc. We're not leaving either of you behind." But even as he said the words, both of them knew that keeping such a promise would require a miracle. The rules of engagement, military regulations, and simple logistics all seemed to make it impossible. Yet somehow, looking down at Ahmad's trusting face, Mitchell knew she would find a way to make it work. The baby had stopped crying entirely, as if he understood that his survival depended on remaining quiet. It was a heartbreaking display of premature wisdom that no child should have to develop. Mitchell held Ahmad close to her chest as the SEAL team secured the immediate area around the compound. The baby's weight felt both insignificant and enormous at the same time. Physically, he was just a few pounds, but emotionally, he represented a responsibility that could change the course of her entire life. Thompson was on the radio with command, trying to explain their situation in military terms that somehow seemed inadequate for the human drama that had just unfolded. Base Alpha Team has recovered one KIA adult female civilian and one surviving infant. Female died from combat-related injuries sustained during the firefight. Infant is uninjured, but requires immediate humanitarian assistance. The response from command was predictably bureaucratic. Alpha Team, document the civilian casualty, and continue with primary mission objectives. Local authorities will be notified for civilian cleanup and infant placement. Sir, there are no local authorities in this area. Thompson responded, his frustration evident in his voice. The nearest government presence is over 100 kilometers away, and there's no functioning civil infrastructure. The infant will not survive if left here. Mitchell could hear both sides of the conversation through Thompson's external speaker, and she felt her heart sinking with each exchange. The military system wasn't designed to handle situations like this. There were procedures for everything: enemy contact, medical evacuations, equipment failures, intelligence gathering. But there was no standard operating procedure for adopting an orphaned baby in the middle of a combat operation. Rodriguez was keeping watch while Kim documented the scene with his camera, taking photographs that would be required for the after-action report. The images would show the woman's body, the bullet-damaged building, and the evidence of the insurgent ambush, but they wouldn't capture the emotional weight of what had just occurred. Ahmad began to fuss slightly, probably hungry or uncomfortable from being held by strangers. Mitchell instinctively began rocking him gently, surprised at how natural the motion felt. She had never considered herself particularly maternal. Her focus had always been on her military career and her role as a combat medic. But holding this child felt right in a way that defied logic. "We could take him to the forward operating base," Mitchell suggested to Thompson. "The medical facility there could care for him temporarily, while we figure out long-term placement." Thompson shook his head. "Doc, you know that's not going to work. FOB Medical is designed for treating wounded soldiers, not providing childcare. And even if they could handle it temporarily, what happens then? We can't ship him back to the States, and there's nowhere safe to place him locally." The harsh reality of the situation was becoming clear. Ahmad was trapped in a bureaucratic and logistical nightmare that had no easy solutions. He was an Afghan citizen, so he couldn't simply be taken to America. But he was also an orphan in a war zone where traditional family and tribal structures had been destroyed by years of conflict. Mitchell's radio crackled with an incoming transmission from an unexpected source. "Alpha Team, this is Chaplain Morrison at FOB Courage. I understand you have a humanitarian situation that requires assistance." Thompson looked surprised. Military chaplains rarely inserted themselves into tactical operations. But Morrison was known throughout the theater for his unconventional approach to providing spiritual support to the troops. "Chaplain, this is Alpha Team Leader. We have an orphaned infant whose mother was killed in combat. Standard protocols don't seem to address this situation adequately." "Roger that, Alpha Team. I've been monitoring your transmissions, and I may have a solution." There's an approved NGO operating in Kandahar that specializes in placing war orphans with vetted Afghan families. If you can get the child to Fabi Courage, I can coordinate with them to ensure proper placement. Mitchell felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by the knowledge that getting Ahmad to Fob Courage would require a helicopter flight through dangerous airspace, and there was no guarantee that the NGO placement would be safe or permanent. "What's the timeline on that, Chaplain?" Thompson asked. "The NGO representative can be at Fobi Courage within 72 hours. The child would need medical clearance and documentation, but it's definitely possible." Ahmad chose that moment to start crying, not the angry wailing of a distressed infant, but the weak, tired cry of a child who was hungry, scared, and missing his mother. Mitchell felt her heart breaking as she realized that no matter what solution they found, this child had already lost everything that mattered to him. "We'll take him," Mitchell announced, surprising herself with the firmness of her decision. "I'll carry him to the extraction point and get him to Fob Courage." Thompson stared at her for a moment, considering the tactical implications. Carrying an infant during a combat operation violated numerous safety protocols and would make the entire team more vulnerable. But he also understood that Mitchell had made a commitment to the dying woman, and SEALs took such commitment seriously. "Negative, Doc. Too dangerous. If we make contact during extraction, you won't be able to return fire effectively while carrying him." Mitchell had anticipated this objection and already had a solution. "Rodriguez can carry him. He's got the best language skills if we encounter any locals, and his position in the team formation would keep Ahmad safest during movement." Rodriguez nodded his agreement before Thompson could object. "I've got younger brothers back home. I can handle it." Kim, who had been monitoring their perimeter security, reported new information that changed their tactical situation. "We've got vehicles approaching from the south. 3 trucks moving fast, probably insurgent reinforcements responding to the firefight." Thompson made a quick decision. "We need to move now. Rodriguez, take the baby. Everyone else, standard extraction formation. We'll sort out the details once we reach the pickup zone." As Rodriguez carefully took Ahmad from Mitchell's arms, the baby looked back at her with those dark, serious eyes. For a moment, Mitchell felt like he was trying to memorize her face, as if he understood that she had been the one to hold him when his mother died. The SEAL team moved quickly through the village streets, heading toward their designated extraction point 2 kilometers away. Rodriguez carried Ahmad against his chest, using his body armor and tactical vest to create a protective cradle for the infant. The baby remained remarkably quiet, seeming to understand that silence was still necessary for survival. As they moved, Mitchell found herself thinking about the woman who had died protecting her son. She didn't even know the woman's name, but she would never forget the look in her eyes when she placed Ahmad in Mitchell's arms. It was a look that said, "I trust you with the most important thing in my life." The extraction helicopter was already inbound when the SEAL team reached the pickup zone. Mitchell could hear the distinctive sound of the UH-60 Blackhawk's rotors cutting through the air, promising safety and a chance to honor the promise she had made to a dying mother. But as they waited for the helicopter to land, Mitchell realized that saving Ahmad's life was only the beginning. The real challenge would be ensuring that he had a future worth living, a future that honored the sacrifice his mother had made to keep him alive. The helicopter ride back to Fob Courage was unlike any extraction Mitchell had ever experienced. Instead of the usual post-mission adrenaline and tactical debriefing, the team sat in relative silence, each member lost in thought about what they had witnessed. Ahmad slept peacefully in Rodriguez's arms, seemingly unaware that his entire world had changed in the span of a few hours. As the Black Hawk touched down at the forward operating base, Mitchell felt the weight of responsibility settling even more heavily on her shoulders. She had made a promise to a dying woman, but now she had to navigate a complex web of military bureaucracy, international law, and humanitarian concerns to honor that commitment. Chaplain Morrison was waiting for them at the landing zone, along with Major Patricia Williams, the base's executive officer. Williams was known for her strict adherence to regulations, and Mitchell could tell from her expression that she was not particularly pleased with the situation. "Corpsman Mitchell," Williams said as the team disembarked, "I understand you've brought an unauthorized person onto this base." "Ma'am, the infant is an orphaned civilian requiring humanitarian assistance," Mitchell replied. maintaining military protocol while trying to convey the urgency of Ahmad's situation. Be that as it may, this base is not equipped to provide childcare services. We need to resolve the situation quickly and through proper channels. Chaplain Morrison stepped forward diplomatically. Major Williams, I've already been in contact with the International Children's Relief Organization. They have a representative en route who specializes in exactly this type of situation. With your permission, I'd like to coordinate temporary care until proper placement can be arranged. Ahmad chose that moment to wake up and begin crying, his voice echoing across the busy flight line. The sound was heartbreaking in its loneliness, a cry that seemed to embody all the tragedy and loss of war distilled into one small, vulnerable life. Without thinking, Mitchell reached out and took Ahmad from Rodriguez. The baby immediately calmed down when she held him, snuggling against her tactical vest as if he recognized her as the person who had been with him during his mother's final moments. Major Williams watched this interaction with a mixture of confusion and concern. Corpsman, you do understand that you cannot simply adopt this child, correct? There are legal procedures, international agreements, and adoption protocols that must be followed. Yes, ma'am. I understand the complexity of the situation, but I also understand that this child has no one else in the world right now, and his mother specifically asked me to protect him. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the base's senior medical officer, approached the group after observing the discussion. Major, if I may suggest, we should first ensure the infant receives a complete medical evaluation. He's been exposed to combat conditions and may have injuries or health issues that aren't immediately apparent. This practical suggestion provided a temporary solution that satisfied military protocols while giving Mitchell more time to figure out Ahmad's future. She carried him to the base medical facility, where Dr. Hayes conducted a thorough examination. He's remarkably healthy considering what he's been through, Dr. Hayes reported. Some minor dehydration and signs of stress, but no injuries or serious medical concerns. I'd estimate his age at about 7 months, and his development appears normal. As Dr. Hayes worked, Ahmad gripped Mitchell's finger with surprising strength. The simple gesture felt like a lifeline connecting them both to something larger than military regulations and bureaucratic procedures. Doc, can I ask you something personal? Dr. Hayes said as she completed her examination. Have you given any thought to what you actually want for this child? I mean, beyond just keeping him safe? Mitchell hadn't really allowed herself to think beyond the immediate crisis. But now, holding Ahmad and feeling responsible for his future, she found herself imagining possibilities she had never considered before. I want him to have a real family, she said slowly. People who will love him and help him understand where he came from. I want him to know that his mother was a hero who died protecting him. Dr. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. Those are good goals, but you need to understand that achieving them might require some very difficult decisions on your part. Over the next 2 days, Mitchell spent every off-duty moment caring for Ahmad. She fed him, changed his diapers, and held him when he cried. The other members of her team helped when they could, but it was clear that Ahmad had formed a special attachment to Mitchell. Word of the situation spread throughout the base, and Mitchell was surprised by the response from her fellow service members. Soldiers and Marines who had never shown any interest in children were bringing formula, diapers, and toys from care packages they had received from home. The tough professional warriors of FOB Courage had collectively adopted Ahmad as their mascot and responsibility. On the 3rd day, Sarah Chen from the International Children's Relief Organization arrived at the base. She was a petite woman in her 40s who spoke perfect Dari and had years of experience dealing with war orphans throughout Afghanistan. I've reviewed Ahmad's case, Chen told Mitchell during their first meeting. The situation is complicated because we have no documentation of his parentage, no surviving family members that we can identify, and no clear legal status for him within the Afghan system. Mitchell felt her heart sinking. So what does that mean for his future? It means we have several options, none of them perfect. We can place him with an Afghan family through our foster program. Though finding suitable families in this region is challenging, we can transfer him to our facility in Kabul, which provides excellent care but is essentially an orphanage. Or, Chen paused, studying Mitchell's face carefully. Or, Mitchell prompted. Or we can explore the possibility of international adoption. It's a complex process that can take years. requires extensive background checks and legal procedures, and would mean Ahmad leaving Afghanistan permanently. Mitchell understood immediately what Chen was really asking. You're talking about me adopting him. I'm talking about exploring all options that would provide Ahmad with the best possible future. Your attachment to him is obvious, and his attachment to you is equally clear. If you're serious about wanting to provide him with a loving family, then yes, adoption might be an option worth considering. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of incoming mortar rounds. The base's alarm system activated, and all personnel immediately moved to hardened shelters. Mitchell instinctively protected Ahmad with her body as they took cover, and she realized that this war zone was no place for a child to grow up. As the attack subsided and normal operations resumed, Mitchell found herself facing the most important decision of her life. She could help arrange for Ahmad's placement with an Afghan family, and then return to her military duties, knowing she had honored her promise to his mother. Or she could completely change the trajectory of her own life by pursuing adoption and accepting responsibility for raising the child she had held as his mother died. Looking down at Ahmad's sleeping face, Mitchell realized that the decision had already been made. It had been made the moment his mother placed him in her arms and asked her to keep him safe. Everything else was just paperwork and procedures. Ms. Chen, Mitchell said quietly, what do I need to do to start the adoption process? 18 months later, Mitchell stood in her small apartment in San Diego, watching Ahmad take his first wobbly steps across the living room floor. The toddler had grown into a happy, healthy child who spoke a mixture of English and the few Dari words that Mitchell had learned to help him maintain a connection to his heritage. The adoption process had been every bit as complex and challenging as Sarah Chen had warned. Military lawyers, international adoption agencies, Afghan government officials, and U.S. immigration authorities had all been involved in the lengthy legal proceedings. Mitchell had used every day of accumulated leave, spent her savings on legal fees, and called in favors from contacts throughout the military and diplomatic community. The most difficult part had been explaining to Ahmad, as he grew old enough to understand, why he was different from other children. Mitchell had created a photo album that told his story. Pictures of Afghanistan, the village where he was born, and even a respectful photo of the compound where his mother had died protecting him. She wanted him to understand that he came from a place of courage and sacrifice. Dr. Hayes had been right about the difficult decisions. Mitchell had ultimately decided to leave active duty and join the Navy Reserve so she could provide Ahmad with stability and consistent care. She now worked as a civilian emergency medical technician while pursuing her nursing degree, using her military medical training in a new career that allowed her to be a full-time mother. Thompson and the other members of her SEAL team had remained in contact, becoming an extended family of uncles who spoiled Ahmad whenever they were in town. Rodriguez, in particular, had maintained a special bond with the child he had carried to safety, teaching him Spanish alongside English and serving as a bridge between Ahmad's Afghan heritage and his American future. The knock on Mitchell's door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Chaplain Morrison, now retired from the military but still maintaining connections with the families he had helped during his service. "Sarah, I have something for you," Morrison said, holding a manila envelope. "It took some time to track down, but I thought Ahmad should have this when he's old enough to understand." Inside the envelope was a photograph that had been taken by Afghan police investigators at the scene where Ahmad's mother had died. But this wasn't a crime scene photo. It was a picture of the woman herself taken from her identification documents. For the first time, Mitchell was seeing the face of the woman who had entrusted her with the most precious thing in her life. The woman was younger than Mitchell had expected, probably in her early 20s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Her name, according to the documents, had been Fatima Ahmadi, and she had been a teacher at the village school before the conflict had made education impossible. She was trying to get to the Pakistani border with her son, Morrison explained. Her husband had been killed fighting with the Afghan National Army, and she was fleeing because insurgents had threatened to kill her for supporting education for girls. She almost made it. Mitchell felt tears welling up in her eyes as she studied the photograph. For the first time, Fatima was more than just a dying woman in a blue burqa. She was a real person with a history, dreams, and a love for her son that had transcended her own death. Ahmad toddled over to Mitchell and pulled on her pant leg, babbling in his mixture of languages. She picked him up and showed him the photograph. "This is your first mommy," Mitchell said gently. "Her name was Fatima and she loved you very much. She was very brave. And she made sure you would be safe." Ahmad studied the photograph with serious concentration, as if trying to understand the significance of what he was seeing. Then he pointed at the picture and said, "Mama," before pointing at Mitchell and saying, "Mama," again. Mitchell realized that in Ahmad's world, he had two mothers, one who had given him life and died protecting him, and one who had promised to keep him safe and was raising him with love. It was a concept that transcended traditional definitions of family and spoke to something deeper about human connection and responsibility. Morrison stayed for dinner, and they talked about the other children he had helped place during his time in Afghanistan. Ahmad's case had not been unique. There were hundreds of orphans created by the conflict, though few had been fortunate enough to have someone like Mitchell advocate for them. "Do you ever regret it?" Morrison asked as they watched Ahmad play with his toys. "Changing your whole life for a child you barely knew?" Mitchell considered the question seriously. Her military career had been important to her, and she had given up promotions, deployments, and the brotherhood of the SEAL teams to become a single mother. Her financial situation was more challenging than it had been as an active-duty service member, and her future was less certain. "Never," she said without hesitation. "My life had purpose before, but now it has meaning. There's a difference." Ahmad chose that moment to bring Mitchell one of his books, climbing into her lap and demanding a bedtime story. As she read to him about brave knights and distant kingdoms, Mitchell thought about the woman who had made this moment possible through her sacrifice. Fatima Ahmadi had given her son life, protection, and ultimately a future. She had made the ultimate sacrifice to ensure that her child would survive, trusting a stranger to honor a promise made in the final moments of her life. Mitchell had kept that promise, but she had also gained something unexpected in return. She had learned that family wasn't always about blood relationships or traditional structures. Sometimes family was about making a commitment to love and protect someone who needed you, regardless of the cost to yourself. As Ahmad fell asleep in her arms, Mitchell thought about the long journey that had brought them to this quiet moment in their San Diego apartment. From a combat zone in Afghanistan to a peaceful evening in America, their story was one of tragedy transformed into hope, loss transformed into love, and a promise kept across cultures, languages, and continents. She knew that Ahmad would face challenges as he grew up, questions about his identity, his heritage, and his place in the world. But she also knew that he would face those challenges with the knowledge that he was deeply loved by two mothers who had each sacrificed everything to give him the best possible life. Looking down at his sleeping face, Mitchell whispered the same words that Fatima Ahmadi might have said in her final moments. "You are safe now. You are loved. And you will always be remembered." The SEAL medic who had once saved lives on the battlefield had found her most important mission in the quiet moments of raising a child who would grow up knowing that courage, sacrifice, and love could triumph over even the darkest circumstances of war.